The Inquisitor felt a growl gargling up from deep in his chest, the agony in his split side cutting into his every thought and instinct the longer this contest was drawn out. Before his eyes twirled the green blade of the heretical Jedi Master who now faced him, the man grinning widely at his opponent under a storm of black dreadlocks. Commissar Tyrandor drove in with his chainsword, the adamantium teeth of his specially issued weapon grinding and screaming against the energy blade which intercepted it. The Jedi seemed shocked by the act, his sword of light suddenly yanked low, offering Tar Weiler the opportunity he had been seeking. Stepping in, Tar ignored all his pain, trembling arms straightened as he poised his black rapier in for a stab. The Jedi couldn't even see the attack coming, which added to Weiler's rage a moment later when the man precognitively jerked himself back, the Inquisitor's blade slicing over and through the robes which covered his chest, drawing a thin red line on his tanned skin and prompting the Jedi to spin back in an athletic withdrawal. "Damn you!" Tar cursed, staggering, his free hand clapping down over his saber wound again, struggling to keep his feet. Tyrandor did not let up, however, and was not idle while his chainsword dragged the Jedi saber down. With his other hand, he aimed with his last pistol, firing and striking the Jedi across the back and shoulder with 2 bolts. But Tyrandor's keen eyes caught the odd refraction of his weapon's energy discharge as they neared the foul enemy knight, the light splitting and weakening as a psychic shield of some kind interfered with his attack. Nonetheless, the Jedi jerked when struck, his robes catching fire and the smell of burnt flesh joining the cold, damp air. Yet, it was not enough to bring the man down, and he finished his recovery spin, tossing off his brown robe to reveal the blaster plates he wore underneath, sizzling and glowing in 2 places where he had been struck. Infuriatingly, his grin only grew wider as he eyed the Inquisitor and the Commissar, both of whom had begun to spread out to either side, drawing his attention apart. Time was on the Jedi side, and both Imperials knew it. All around the 3 combatants, the maddened clones and newly arrived Jedi Knights were cutting back Tyrandor's survivors with merciless hate. If Tyrandor and Tar Weiler did not end the fight very soon, it would almost certainly not remain a 3-person affair. Something the Jedi before them seemed to know as well, as he took his time reaching behind his back and drawing out a second weapon, a blaster pistol. "All right. Let's get fracking serious," he said, and, as if on cue, the 2 Imperials attacked, driving in from opposite sides. Tar was delayed, ducking to the left and right as the Jedi Quinlan Voss crossed his blaster-wielding arm over and fired several shots in his direction. The bolts were easy enough to dodge, but doing so was raw agony, and succeeded in slowing the wounded Inquisitor long enough for Voss to meet blade to blade with the Commissar once more. Tyrandor charged while firing his last pistol, burning, searing shots drawing brief red lines in the enervating air. But he only managed to fire 3 times before the Jedi's lightsaber sent the last bolt careening back. The shot went right up the barrel of Tyrandor's weapon, causing it to detonate in his hand. The Commissar bellowed his agony as fury, tossing the wasted scraps that were left of his gun from his now burnt and broken hand, sending them towards his opponent as he bore his chainsword high for an overhead swing. The dreaded Jedi wove around the scrapped weapon and locked his saber with the Commissar's chain blade once more, this time braced for the impact. The toothed Imperial sword squealed and whined, its adamantium barbs beginning to glow like dragon's teeth as they struggled to grind against the lightsaber's flaring energy field. They seemed locked for a precious couple of seconds, but Voss grinned, a wicked flashing of his teeth as he aimed into the Commissar with his blaster. Tyrandor bore his own teeth in a grimace, and prepared himself, grunting as he was shot twice, the bright, searing energy bolts smacking hard into his chest. Meanwhile, the Inquisitor was back on the approach, a fact the Jedi was well aware of. prepared to transform from his current lock with his dying opponent to a re-engagement with the foul Imperial superior. But, to his shock, Terrandor did not weaken, the burned holes in his red uniform revealing the cracked and blistered surface of ceramite underplating. The Jedi scowled, making to shoot him again, but was forced to abandon the act and fire in the other direction, in a last attempt to drive the Inquisitor off again. The black-cloaked Imperial shivered through the air like a phantom, ducking and dodging the shots his enemy sent, even as blood dripped from between his shark-like teeth. Voss was barely able to keep him at bay, taking careful shots, trying to wear him down, drive the Inquisitor into a mistake. But, in doing that, he made a mistake of his own, focusing too much on Tarweiler's encroaching form and not on the Commissar who was still locked behind his saber's blade. Terrandor grit his teeth, lifted a leg, and kicked hard into the inside calf of the man he was contending with, dropping Voss to one knee all of a sudden, the Jedi nearly meeting his end then and there. He was almost caught by the back end of his own blade and the descending teeth of the Commissar's chainsword, using the Force and his own martial might to hold both blades above his head with one arm, as he took less accurate shots at the Inquisitor. Seeing his footwork denied to him, Tar extended his free hand out, curling his functioning fingers as he reached with his mind and found Voss's own. "No fear, Jedi," he hissed, invading his thoughts with spiked barbs of terror and dread, samplings of victims who had suffered at the ends of Tarweiler's psychic mercies. Unable to rotate his body or saber to engage the rhythms of Vapad, Quinlan Voss suddenly found himself tensing tightly across his entire body, sweat soaking his brow and stinging his eyes as he held off both the psychic assault of the Inquisitor with his mind alone and the grinding pressure of the Commissar's chainsword with one arm. It was too much, and the Jedi was forced to drop his blaster after firing a few more inaccurate shots, taking his saber in both hands and trying to keep his mind lucid as nightmares of all nature shredded themselves over his thoughts, bleeding into his sight like the traumatic memories of wars long fought. Were it not for his affinity for the dark side, Master Quinlan Voss would have met his untimely end already. As it was, he was barely holding on. "Fall, Jedi! Fall!" The Inquisitor screeched, laying on more of his power, and Voss found himself roaring in defiance as he was bent backward by the Commissar above him, losing his balance slowly. And a Jedi did fall, but not as they would have thought. All around them the other Jedi fought, and from above more descended. In particular, one Ram Koda, who fell upon Terrandor like a divine bolt of emerald lightning, his burning green blade shearing through the Commissar's bicep in an instant, the chain sword held there flying off wildly as its grounding force was literally cut away. Terrandor reeled, screaming out his pain and indignant rage. But he barely began to react before Koda spun on his heel and mule-kicked the Commissar with a force-enhanced blow, sending him sailing through the air and over the embankment. Voss wasted no time, spinning to his feet the instant the chainsword was off of him, shoulders rolling, saber dervishing in his hand as he assumed the Vapad form, and dispatched the dark technique which sought to break his mind. Inquisitor Tarweiler tried to retreat a step, but the surprise and effort of it caused his existing wound to flare, and he staggered instead, barely able to raise his rapier in time to intercept the Jedi. But even that was not enough. Voss was smoldering with his own lethal instincts, and as the aggressive form of Vapad continued to flow through him, it fed into those old habits, fueling the power of his strikes and the directness of his approach. He slapped the rapier out of Tarweiler's hand. Such was the strike the Inquisitor barely detected, rearing as the Jedi continued to spin. But the sword-wielding witch did not bring his saber in for a killing blow. Instead, Quinlan Voss bit down on his darker thoughts and reached out with his offhand, seizing the Inquisitor by the throat and spinning him, slamming him by the neck into a nearby steel wall. Tar gagged and choked, nearly all the breath being slammed out of him as he was pinned, his feet raised and held off the ground as the Dark Jedi constricted his airway, grinning darkly for a moment before softening his grip. You are now a prisoner of the Galactic Republic. Behave, or I'll have to whittle down the number of limbs you have to help make you manageable. Do you understand? Asked Quinlan Voss, his hand relaxing enough for Tar Weiler to give his answer. The Inquisitor quirked his bloody lips. Mercy? At a time like this, would wonders and fools never cease? I understand, he hissed. Good. Then let's find a place to... Voss began to say. I understand that you are a fool, Master Jedi. You should have killed me when you had the chance. The Inquisitor added with a rasping laugh. I still may, if you try anything. The Jedi warned, bringing his saber up to Tar's neck. Oh, I need not try anything more than words, said the Inquisitor, and at that, Voss quirked his eyebrows. Words? And what do you imagine you can say right now that will have that effect? The Jedi asked. In response, the Inquisitor smiled grimly and said, Jackal. In response to the single utterance, the air seemed to still, and a voice which sounded faint yet all present spoke in their ears. Yes, Master. It said, the speaking voice being the definition of inhuman, like the shaped, manipulated sound of millions of animals being slaughtered, edited to resemble a speaking voice. Quinlan felt his blood freezing in his veins, but it was already too late. I unleash you, said the Inquisitor. At last, responded the creature who stood just behind Quinlan Voss, its clawed hand reaching to obscure half of his face. The clear sky darkened as a new storm front began to rise. But the clouds coalescing in the heavens were born of nothing natural. Red, like the blood which was flowing, and the blood which would soon flow. They spun out in languid spirals, devouring portions of the burning sky with lazy crimson coils. And from the sanguine shadow of these growing storms rose the end. Take those roof accesses, there and there. They should be at a proper angle to allow our troopers to provide fire support to our forces on the main road, said Ayla, walking as she gestured towards the intended locations. Yes, sir, said the clone captain at her side, saluting sharply before veering away to organize his men. Combine what's left of Commando Squads Delta and Iowa, and get them situated up here with sniper configurations. I need them killing Imperial commanders, and I need it done 10 minutes ago, Ayla said as she came to the railing overlooking a particular stretch of the raging battle below them. Aye, ma'am, I'm on it, affirmed the clone commander she had been addressing, snapping a crisp salute which was completely at odds with his blackened armor and bloody helmet. Ayla gave no more than a nod as the man departed, too busy looking over the battlefield. Juggernauts dueled and danced to the best of their ability around the behemoth tank of the Imperials. all while ATTEs and the smaller mainline vehicles squared off against one another, blowing each other to pieces as often as not. And between the treads, wheels, and metal legs of the technological war beasts flowed a river of bodies. Alive and dead, fighting, dying, and being trampled in the press. From the direction of the attacking Republic, the tide was white, uniform, and bravely bellowing war cries as they marched on for the fate of the greater galaxy. And that pale rapid was met by a darker one, composed of the rubberized suits of the relatively new Imperial soldiers. They fought silently, each one seeming nearly identical to the next thanks to their all-encompassing armors. They rarely made any noise as they fought and died, dread parodies of the clones they faced off against. They were armed with an incredible variety of weapons, from their standard high-intensity laser rifles to flamethrowers, similar magma dispensers, and melee weapons of all kinds. Interspersed between them were the tall forms of the powerful Imperial fanatics, the all-female cultists doing more than merely battling alongside the other Imperial forces. They seemingly inspired even the blank-faced foes to even greater feats of silent frenzy wherever they could be seen. Ayla bit her lips so tightly, it bled. She needed to get back down there, to intervene where they were weakening in order to restore their forward movement towards the Basilica of Salvation. But even Ayla had her limits, and as it was, she had been fighting for hours. She was covered in small wounds, cuts and burns earned by her continuous evasion of death's dogged attempts to seize her. How many more times could she expect to elude her fate? And even more pressingly, she was simply tired. Entirely worn down, in fact. Her every muscle twitched and ached, pushed far, far over her limit, even when factoring in her powers with the Force. The Twi'lek Jedi Master needed to rest, to recover her strength. But for every second she took for herself, tens or hundreds of clones whom she could have saved died, and their forward line was stalled ever faster. Numbers were no longer on her side, a fact she could see with terrifying clarity from her high perch. The 327th were on their last legs, and those legs were shaking, almost breaking against the tide of Imperial wrath. They needed her, but she would be less than useless if she died. She gripped the handrail of the skyscraper's roof, arms trembling, legs leadened. Did she even have strength enough left in her to leap over this meager barrier and summon the force needed to slow her fall as she came to their aid? She needed Shakti. She needed Master Quinlan Voss. Anybody to help her carry the absurd burden which now fell fully onto her shoulders. But there was no one. Commander 65 had ceased all communications. And the reports from the occupied Imperial support base confirmed that Commander Bly had been killed in action by an Imperial war machine. She dared not recall that force and allow any more Imperial death-dealing contraptions to escape. But without them, what was now on the field was all she had left. And if nothing was done to shift the tempo of the ongoing battle, it would leave her forces too mauled and depleted to actually breach the Basilica once they reached it. All in all, things were beginning to look extremely bleak. And yet, this was only the beginning of the darkness which Ayla now had to face. A fact that revealed itself with horrific suddenness by the sounding of a titanic roar. Her eyes were dragged away from the dueling tanks and the frenzied soldiers who poured around, between and over their hulls. There, approaching with a loping, thundering gait, was the description of the war engine her clones had reported to her. It was half as tall as a juggernaut, and carried on massive metal legs. But this was no ATTE or anything similar. It was red, covered in seals of paper, and bearing its name upon a massive banner of Imperial script hung under a heraldic shield, as if in reference to the Jedi Knights of old. It was the fastest, large-sized, all-terrain vehicle she had ever seen, and its initial charge took it into the side of one of her own walkers. The ATTE being flipped clean onto its flank by the sheer force of the tackle. It followed this up by aiming its enormous arm-mounted weapon into the walker tank's belly, unloading a mutilating torrent of energy which tore the Republic war machine into molten pieces in mere seconds. A juggernaut came in immediate answer, driving full force into the new target, ramming the bipedal monster with its own, even larger frame. By use of its larger size and advanced speed, the clone turbo tank was attempting to flatten the Imperial war machine under its 10 oversized metal tires. But the charge was blunted and temporarily halted by a flashing sphere of energy which surrounded the walker, some kind of powerful shield. It bought the adversary enough time for it to swing its free hand towards the juggernaut, revealing that this digited hand without a gun was, in fact, not free at all, but a potent and designed weapon all of its own. The blocky fingers of that flat, sparking fist closed as it punched the front of the charging turbo tank, releasing an incredible discharge of energy as it made contact with the superconductive armor which sheathed the juggernaut. That armor was designed to take heat and energy and disperse it harmlessly across the entire breadth of the vehicle, an ingenious design for rendering blaster-based weaponry ineffective against it. But the power fist of the Imperial Knight was nothing like such weapons, and its power field was made to be highly concentrated and to bear enough armor-piercing destructive capacity to pulverize a warship's hull, provided that the ship had no void shielding to deflect it. That power struck the surface of the Republic vehicle, and instead of merely destroying only what it came in contact with, its energy was siphoned out and spread across the entire skin of the tank. The vehicle flashed, the thickest lines of its armor glowing bright orange and red, the coloring spreading like rotting sores of burgeoning sunlight over its entire carapace, until the tank's internal stores of Tabana gas reached critical heat and detonated ferociously. The blast flattened any soldiers caught near it, throwing Imperials and clones aside in a sudden cascade of burnt bodies and rent armor. And, striding from the wreckage, its blue ionic shield still flaring in a corona of azure aegis, the knightly walker roared mechanically, announcing its brutal victory and beginning its charge to the next. That was where Ayla was needed, and soon. She began to prepare herself, breathing in and out in a careful, ritualized way. That walker alone would not make the difference. It couldn't. She would stop it. And perhaps she could have, had the Imperial war machine been alone. But as her eyes adjusted and moved up beyond the outright spectacle of the night, she saw something new and debatably far more terrible. A screaming, singing stream of warrior fanatics, much like the ones who had already taken to the field, but far, far more numerous than before. The vast majority were not clad in the powerful war suits used by those she had already seen, but rather wore more standard combat equipment, their faces covered in metallic masks bearing the enraged visage of the same female saint of their insane religion. Leading this horde of more common troops were the organized but no less frenzied ranks of the taller, battle-armored Sisters of War that Ayla had already been contending with. And though they were not the bulk of the new army, They were still far more numerous than the existing fanatics who had laid waste to her forces on the battlefield. And, far more terribly still, she saw that there was a unique figure at their head. A towering, striding warrior whose flowing, leaping steps brought them far ahead of their leading ranks. From the shape of the armor and body, Ayla surmised the Imperial was a female fanatic like all the others around her. But her face bore no feminine mask. Instead, her golden helm was in the shape of a long-haired man, his eyes closed, his face serene, but marred by the slightest tinge of subtle rage. Ayla hardly needed to enhance her senses with the Force to see that this mask represented one thing, one figure in their pantheon of madness. This woman bore the face of the so-called God Emperor of Mankind. And as the fanatic waded into the battle, the effect on the morale of the Imperials around her spoke volumes of its own. Imp soldiers raised their voices in song, in elation, and in choirs of wrath as their efforts redoubled or tripled. The wounded rose, light ablaze in their eyes, songs of fire carried on their bloodied lips. And the weakened and tired found new, greater strength with the arrival of these faithful reinforcements. With a sliding, sickening terror, Ayla realized that the battle was irretrievable. She could not make a difference large enough to turn back that kind of force, and she watched the lines of her own forces ignite and curl away from the assault of these new fanatics. There was only one thing she could do now. "Field commanders, can you read me?" Ayla said, tapping her comm piece. "Prepare to begin an organized retreat back to the landing zones. The 33rd Vanguard, the 12th Armored Division, and everything that's left of Assault Forces 22 and 80 will join me at the front. We will buy you time for a staggered withdrawal. We have no choice but to..." She began to say, before another voice interjected across her comm and waylaid her commands. "Belay those orders. Stand by for reinforcements, troopers. Hold fast. You are the shield of the Republic, and we have not abandoned you. General Windu, out." The words made Ayla's breath catch in her throat, and she spun around in reaction, turning and shading her eyes as she saw what the battle below had distracted her from noticing. Hundreds upon hundreds of claw-shaped boarding pods were hovering down, landing atop the buildings around her and releasing their cargo. The many surviving members of the Jedi Order's boarding fleet emerging. She saw right away that there were many dead and wounded, but saw also that most of the Jedi present, though bearing new scars and many injuries, were still standing and ready to continue the fight. Master Obi-Wan Kenobi and Master Mace Windu were among the first to emerge, approaching her right away. Ayla turned, pushing off from the railing, but staggering to one knee a moment later, head spinning. She soon found their hands helping to pull her up, and she could not help but smile into their faces, even as she struggled to keep her feet. "You came. Thank the Force. Were you successful?" she asked with great elation. "Mostly successful," said Master Obi-Wan. "The ship is largely disabled, and we've captured several assets. 3 Imperial aliens known as Navigators, several members of their ship crew, officers among them, and the body of a Space Marine librarian," supplied Mace Windu. "Librarian?" she asked with a quirk of her head. "I'll explain later. What's the situation here?" asked the burned champion of their order. "Grim," Ayla answered without hesitation. "Our artillery support has been completely cut off, and I have been unable to receive updates from the Force deployed to protect the sniper tanks. Currently, it seems they were wiped out. The secondary force is holding the Imperial support base successfully, but I dare not pull them away and allow more war machines to escape those bays. Commander Bly is gone." The Jedi sent to destroy the Imperial Planetary HQ have yet to rejoin with me, though the last time I checked, they had been largely successful in their own missions. And what about Master Shakti? Was her mission successful? Asked Master Obi-Wan. Ayla grimaced, soot-stained face looking away. The Imperial response to our initial attack was entirely thrown off, so I assume that she was, at least initially, successful. But I have not seen or heard from her since the battle commenced. I fear the worst. We managed to fight and grind our way to this point of the approach. The Basilica is less than a kilometer away now. But the Imperial defense has been reinforced, and their heavy army support and advanced shock infantry are stalling and pushing us back. Casualties for the 327th have reached anywhere between 40 to 60%, and they are mounting fast. We need to get our sabers on the ground and start taking the brunt of this assault off of my men, she reported with no small sense of urgency. No, said Master Windu. No what? Ayla asked back, confused. We will handle this. We have almost 1,500 Jedi left ready to fight, more than enough to turn the tide without your help. You need to pull back and retire from this battle, the Jedi Master explained. With all due respect, I can't, Ayla said stiffly. Ayla, you can barely stand. We're grateful that you have carried the fight on your own for this long, but you are not alone anymore. Master Obi-Wan offered gently, but she shook her head to him as well. I've been fighting these Imperials for hours. I know them. I know what they are doing, and I cannot leave my troopers down there without my support. I can't. I've already lost Commander Bly, she said, breath catching as the reality of that loss struck her, taking a moment to collect her composure. Obi-Wan looked almost stricken, and Mace softened his face, extending a hand out to grab her shoulder, holding it firmly. Then there is something else you can do to help. Something that won't include needlessly putting your own life in danger. Take Aquila Squad, and go find Master Quinlan Voss and Master Ram Koda. Help them finish their objectives, and guide them and their force of Jedi back this way when you can. We need as many as possible if we're going to staunch these losses and crush their final defense. Do you understand? Mace asked, Ayla pausing before firming her resolve and giving him a short nod. Good. Then I won't delay you any longer. Rest while you can, and take a hefty escort of gunships with you. You may need them to help ferry the rest of the Order here faster. Windu added, giving her shoulder a reassuring squeeze before letting her go and turning away. Ayla took off the instant she could, radioing the squad for a pickup as she did. Obi-Wan watched after her and smirked wanly. Do you think that transit time will be long enough for her to catch her second wind? He asked Master Windu. Mace shook his head. More like her fifth or sixth wind at this point. No, I don't think Ayla will be of much use to us in a fight, not for another day or so. But if Voss is the one that tells it to her, she will be much more likely to listen. The champion of the Jedi Order said as he strode to the railing she had been at before, staring down at the deteriorating battle. Now, Master Kenobi, let us put the strength we saved from our assault on the ship to good use, said Master Windu, resting his foot on the railing and drawing his right hand out to his side, pulling his belted saber into it with the call of the Force. Obi-Wan did much the same, drawing his own blade into his hand and then igniting it. A torrent of humming blue light bursting from the pommel of his sacred weapon. All around them, the actions were paralleled as hundreds of warrior monks drew their weapons, igniting their fangs of light 10 by 10. Jedi Knights of the Republic, Mace called, raising his amethyst blade of light. To battle!
mountains green, no stain yet on the moon was seen. No words were laid on stream or stone when Durin woke and walked alone.
He named the nameless hills and dells. He drank from yet untasted wells.
He stooped and looked in mirror and saw a crown of stars appear as gems upon a silver thread above the shadows of his head. The world was fair, the mountains tall, in elder days before the fall of mighty kings in Argo throned and Gondolin, who now beyond the western seas have passed away. The world was fair in Durin's day. A king he was on carven throne in many pillared halls of stone, with golden roof and silver floor and runes of power upon the door. The light of sun and star and moon in shining lamps of crystal hue, unlimit by cloud or shade of night, there shone forever fair and bright. The hammer on the anvil smote, their chisel clove and graver wrote. There forged was blade and bound was hilt, the delver mined, the mason built. Their barrel, pearl, and opal veil, and metal wrought, like fishes' mail. Buckler and corselet, axe and sword, and shining spears were laid in hoard. Unwearied then were Durin's folk, beneath the mountains' music woke. The harpers harped, the minstrels sang, and at the gates the trumpets rang. The world is grey, the mountains old, the forges fire is ashen cold. No harp is rung, no hammer falls, the darkness dwells in Durin's halls. The shadow lies upon his tomb, in Moria, in Casa Doom. But still the sunken stars appear in dark and endless pyramid. There lies his crown in water deep, till Durin wakes again from sleep.
The tall man stood in the enclosed space which had been his office, closing the case beside the cogitation interface screen and restraining a contemptuous sigh as he began to reach for the keys which would enable him to activate the final shutdown on his personal terminal. Standing off to his left and right were 2 men each, 4 in total, each members of his personal guard, trusted killers who belonged to his own staff. Behind him, imperceptibly sneering, was the clerical sister who had been issued to serve with him when he had first come into command of the Basilica of Salvation. A short and humiliating appointment, where it should have been the propellant that sent him to the next level. And worst of all, Commissar Shadrick knew it would not end here. That golden bitch and her order of fanatics would take this whole situation up with his commanders. They may even deign to accuse him of heresy, a charge which could well destroy him, even if proclaimed without proper substantiation. All of this simply because they would not allow him to complete his fated victory over Rajulia, the dead Palatine who even now haunted his every step. Once he was done here, he would be forced to leave, to depart to who knows where. The Canoness had not clarified. The only absolute was that he could not remain. And so, defeated though he was, searing from within, he would do as he had been bid, and he would do so with the silent dignity of a man of the commissariat. But he would not forget. That much he silently swore to himself as he prepared his departure. Suddenly, a chime sounded on his cogitator, just as his fingers were hovering above the final shutdown key. He paused, blinking as he looked down into the interface. A personal communication request was being sent to him over the Voxnet. The recipient was suspiciously marked as unknown, but when the Commissar's eye scanned over the words "clearance level vermilion," he suddenly got a good impression of who or what must be on the other side. His mouth dried up, and a rare pulse of true fear riddled and squirmed into his guts, traversing him like a corrupting serpent, the emotion boring into his own flesh with the same efficacy as that of a lethal parasite. He swallowed hard, fingers still hovering, heart pounding like a drum in his ears. The chime continued to bleat, and in spite of the sudden desert-like conditions within his mouth, his eyes suddenly stung as slick sweat beaded his brow and slid down across his paling, sallow skin. Commissar?" The clerical sister who was observing him asked, tilting her head curiously. "Are you going to respond to that communique?" He stiffened a bit more for a brief second, but did not answer, instead sliding his finger down to the key beside the built-in Vox phone on the console, pressing it to accept the connection, and then unclipping the receiver, bringing it up to his mouth and ear. He cleared his throat to gain some control of his voice, and then spoke into the device. "This is Commissar Shadrick," he said sharply, listening closely. The connection was filled with a buzzing static and instability, but there was something else there as well, another sound, a living one. He listened more closely, trying to make it out, though it was clear that whatever it was not words. It was breathing, labored, harsh breathing. And then, just as the Commissar was going to speak again, a scream. Shadrick winced, drawing the Vox away from his ear and shivering. The sound was long, desperate, drawn out, and it contained within it the expression of a pain or fear that he had never personally heard before. The sound was horrifying, but it did not linger alone for long. "Ah,
Commissar, it is good that I have finally been able to reach you,
said a second voice, hissing over the dwindling static of the first.
Do not mind the noise. I am multitasking. My name is Lord Inquisitor Tarweiler, and I have a vital mission for a man like you.
Shadrick worked hard to keep his composure, straightening his posture as much as he could.
How can I be of
he began to say before being cut off by another horrible scream. He swallowed down on a hard lump in his throat, and then continued.
Of service, Lord Inquisitor?
He asked.
The Jedi have destroyed Planetary Command. The Central HQ is aflame. Its staff are dead or captured. The Jedi have accomplished this by releasing an unspeakably powerful daemon of the warp. One which they have now lost control of.
The Inquisitor said over the choppy link, his words punctuated by the pained howls of whatever task he was performing.
After observing the beast, and judging the moral threat inherent therein, I am now sanctioning the use of the Basilica's final protocol. Effective immediately.
Shadrick felt like ice had just replaced all the water in his veins. The final protocol. That could only mean
Exterminatus.
The Commissar breathed out into the receiver.
Yes, an unfortunate but necessary outcome. What the Republic has released cannot be allowed to spread. And the contamination is already so severe that a full evacuation would be impossible at this point. However, just because most must die does not mean that certain others cannot be saved.
The Inquisitor said, his voice slick like caustic oil.
I am listening, my lord.
Commissar Shadrick said in response, heart beating high in his chest.
Good. Listen carefully. Within the armory of this basilica is a locked reliquary. Its access code is Vermilion Sky 2-11. Inside, you will find a teleporter beacon. Once you have it, contact me for a proper tuning frequency, and I will be able to pull you from the surface before it is too late. Consider it the reward for loyalty in the face of great evil. But before I take you, you must ensure that the final protocol has been activated. Understood?
Tarweiler asked over the tiring agonies of his victim. Shadrick's mind was abuzz, the tension moving through him, shifting and undulating as his thoughts rushed feverishly through his scheming brain. This could still be his penultimate moment, could still serve to ascend him even beyond the heights he had previously sought to reach. But he would need to be careful, clever, and ruthless. The line he would need to walk was a sheer one, but he could balance on twine if need be, as long as crossing would take him to where he needed to go. I understand, Inquisitor. You can rely upon me. Just keep your Vox close. I may need further instruction before the task is complete. My portable Vox frequency is being sent electronically now. Until we speak again, the Emperor protects, said the Commissar.
Yes, he does indeed. Good hunting, Commissar. And remember to contact me when the mission is complete. Tarweiler, signing off.
Hissed the Imperial agent, the Vox feed cutting just as another scream began. Commissar Shadrick slowly placed the receiver down, able to all but feel the clerical sister's stare pressing into his back. He caught the eyes of one of his guards and flexed his fingers in a dexterous and precise sign cant, delivering specific instructions to the armed member of his personal guard, and doing so from an angle that the sister behind him could not see.
I have received a message from the Inquisition,
Shadrick began to say, turning slowly to face the sister who had already put that much together from overhearing his side of the conversation. Her eyes were wide and locked onto him fully, the urgency and alarm in her posture unmistakable. "The Inquisition? What did they want here?" she asked. "I need to know the location of the armory at the Basilica," Shadrick said instead of answering her. The sister's face contorted in thought for a moment, confused by the odd demand and puzzling over how that could relate to the most feared organization within their vast imperium. "The armory? The armory is in the East Wing, under the Chapel of Punity. But what does that have to do with the Inquisition's orders? Did I thought I heard you mention exterminatus while you were speaking. Does that..." She was saying as Shadrick noted the location of the armory from her description, and then stepped subtly to the right. Before the clerical sister could actually complete her question, a bright flash of red light silenced her as Shadrick's signaled guard fired his hot-shot las rifle from his hip, boring into the woman's collarbone and killing her before she even knew she was dead. Her body was thrown against the wall and then crumpled to the ground like a discarded heap of worthless parts. He stepped on her as he crossed around the table, snapping his fingers and indicating towards his personal cogitator, having one of the guards quickly pack it up. His troopers did not question him or ask for an explanation. They knew better than to indulge in such frivolities, and soon he and they were striding out of the office and towards the Chapel of Punity. Getting into the center of the Basilica was absolutely necessary to engage its final protocol, and doing so was a journey on a road fraught with countless opportunities for failure. So, before he embarked on it fully, he would be sure to take more than just the teleportation beacon from the vast collection of weapons and artifacts he expected to find there. Perhaps his original plan would prove nearly prophetic, incorrect only insofar as the scale of the ruination he would inflict on those who made themselves his enemies, both imperial and foreign. "Call the rest of my personal retinue," Shadrick said as he marched, arms folded and held behind his back, posture sharp as a razor. "What we do today, we do in the name of the greater Imperium." "Ship systems are starting to short out! I'm not sure we're going to make it at this point!" yelled one of the serving tug captains, speaking invisibly over the comms to the other ships which struggled along with them. Hundreds of civilian starships, from starfighters to freighters, were hauling with all their might against the descending bulk of the burning Confederate cruiser. Cables and grapples squealed and screeched, tractor beam emitters humming and grinding against the unyielding weight of the nearly 2-kilometer-long pillar of durasteel. It left a black, smoking furrow in the sky, and within Combier and his mother's vessel, it was looking more and more like they were not going to make it. "Cable tension is now at critical. They'll snap soon if the engines don't burst on us first," Venora yelled over the screeching of several alarms. Combier sat beside her, working frenziedly to divert more power to the gravitic compensators, teeth grit, brow coated in glistening beads of sweat. Behind them, Jevona watched, wide-eyed, barely able to believe the risk they were willing to take just to help this ship land where it needed to. Disaster was closing its jaws around them, and the enemy had not even begun firing at them yet. "We must flee! Our power is feeble! We cannot carry it!" she implored from behind them. "No!" Combier yelled, and Venora silently agreed. "We cannot abandon our own rescue. The Republic needs us. If any of our ships break away now, we may well doom all the others. Running away is not an option. Mom, get ready to begin deceleration. The final approach begins in 10 kilometers. The armored son of Axum said fiercely. "I'm already trying, but the momentum on this thing is overcoming us." Venora said, barely heard over the screaming alarms. Something pressurized burst inside of the ship, and 3 cold jets of steam began to issue from the control consoles. Commissar acting fast with his tools, working to cut them off and clear their view. Jevona felt herself recoil at his words, yet his candor, his unshakable drive to defend his home, his own, drew her towards him in a different way altogether. Her instincts could feel how near to defeat her family had come, and as much as that drove her to hide and flee, it also propelled her into a very specific kind of search. Her family needed replenishment, and Commissar was composed of the traits they would need to one day rule the worlds beneath the void, and welcome them to the stars. But these were mere instincts, subconscious programs of her genetic design, and though they helped to fuel her moment-to-moment motivations, they did not predominate them. At that moment, the actual thoughts first and foremost within Jevona's half-alien mind were those of self-loathing and constant fear. She was helpless, completely helpless. How many times could she be nothing more than the survivor? Why did the great wills of the gods above continue to spare her life if it was just so that she could watch on helplessly as more and more of her kind and kin were taken from her? She wanted to aid them, to help them all survive, to help them beat back the corpse-worshipping murderers who had deprived her of everything. But Jevona was well aware that she had not been blessed with innate skills in technology or engineering, as some of her now late brothers and sisters had. Nor was she in any way naturally gifted in the arts of combat, soldiering, or death-dealing, as many of the other survivors of her family had been before her capture. Their great father, when he had been alive, had whispered to her when she was but a child, and had promised her the greatest blessings which the star gods could bestow. Yet, before her gifts could be revealed or realized, the false angels had come and destroyed her patriarch. She looked down at her hands, each one so soft and small compared to those which had crushed the life from so many of her family. What could she do with such hands? What had the star gods expected of her? The thought incited an odd heat within her, a searing emotion both human and unspeakably alien, like a mental amalgamation composed of rage, indignation, and dark, star-born ambition. So what if she was weak? Her faith was strong. The gods had chosen her. The patriarch had said so within his mind sermons. Even if she could not feel them, even if she lacked faith in herself, she would not let that weakness overcome her. For she was Jevona of the enlightened stars, and through faith in the greater powers above, she would find a way. Jevona clapped her hands together, head beginning to pound and throb with that searing emotion, rising like an invisible horn from the center of her skull. In her mind, she began to pray, but the prayer was not spoken in any human tongue. It was a prayer of the synapse, a call for power which came both from within her and sought out from the stars as well. Her scaled crest seemed to bristle, and veins suddenly gained definition around her smooth, bald head. They pulsed, squirmed under her skin as she clenched teeth which sharpened in her mouth. Forbidden, hidden genes expressing themselves and manifesting within her chosen flesh. Her third eye, her alien eye, opened within her skull, looking back into her own thoughts and inciting a rapidly blossoming chain reaction. Human genes which carried within them the essence of the Emperor's psychic gift awoke, entwining heretically with similar bloods and humors born of alien design. The gift of the Psyker would have been powerful within Jevona had she only been born a mere human. But she was far, far more. Commissar felt a sudden spike of pain in his head as a telepathic presence began to fill up the air around him, pushing against his hidden mind's eye uncomfortably for a couple of moments before he could adjust. Looking back, he gasped in a surprised breath, eyes widening and trembling at what he saw. Venora noticed his reaction and looked back, but all she could see was Jevona, curled in her seat, hands together in a fervent, silent prayer. But Commissar could see more. He could see the lines of psychic power emanating out from her, brilliant, searing green and yellow, undulating out from her like living organic veins of energy, tethering her to the air around her and spreading further and further by the moment. "Commissar, what is it?" his mother asked, but he did not respond, instead getting up and rushing to the window that was facing the Providence-class dreadnought they were struggling to carry. Outside, he could see the energy continuing to spread and grow like a spiritual slime mold in a time-lapse vid capture, expanding and contracting, but coming out further and further each time it reached out through the walls of their vessel, and beginning to grow and coil around the falling Confederate flagship. "Is this the power of your gods?" he whispered under his breath, and, as if in direct response, the alarms on the ship began to silence one by one. Venora felt an odd elation threaten her composure, her heart racing even faster as she began to check and then double-check her instrumentation. For the briefest moment, she feared her ship had already suffered some critical failure, something which had shorted out her sensors. But no. Instead, she saw rampant confirmation of the impossible. "By the Force, the ship is getting lighter. Systems are returning to sustainable ranges. How is this possible? I don't see any new ships helping out." Venora muttered as she scanned her eyes out across her forward viewport. But, try as she might, she could not see what her son could see, and could only vaguely sense the power which had awakened within their passenger. Commissar marveled for a few moments longer before rushing back to his seat and taking over his station again. He glanced over at Jevona and saw her staring up at him. He flashed her a grateful smile, and she returned it, her few temporarily sharpened teeth somehow fitting her appearance more than they had before. Jevona felt her chest swell with a pride she could call her own as her faith was answered. And, even more than that, she could sense vaguely that Commissar was not the only one who could see her now. From below, and perhaps even from above, alien eyes narrowed as they bore witness to her psychic exertion, cutting like glowing umbra through the sky, joined on the black pall of smoke which was rapidly descending towards the battlefield below. She let herself shine brighter and brighter, exulting in her blessings and fearlessly calling out to any who could see her. As the main avenue came into view below them, the many Axumite ships fired their retro thrusters. The shadow of Trench's flagship, or rather what was left of it, sweeping over the thickly contested battle below. But little did they know that they were bringing much more to this fight than mere reinforcements to the Republic, as hidden forces who had already been moving to rescue their captured sister redirected their approach, moving now into the gathering lodestone of this burgeoning war.
Load up all guns, bring your friends. It's fun to lose and to pretend. She's overboard and self-assured. Oh no, I know a dirty one. Hello. just why I taste. Oh yeah, I guess it makes me smile. I found it, hun, was hard to find. Oh well, whatever, never mind. Hello, 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 hello. With the lights out, it's less dangerous. Here we are now, entertain us. I feel stupid and contagious. Here we are now, entertain us. I'm a lotto and a mosquito, my
Can't stop to think about it. Slave to the brain, I doubt it. Feels like a struggle, tortured body. See step by step and step, make me forget my manners. But I've got warning if you think you want me. You smack the sense out of me, redder than dirty money. I'm not a monster, but you make me wonder. Put in a blaze of fury, eyes getting kinda blurry, making me wanna roll like thunder. Maybe it's the moonlight mixed with carnal inside. Violent blood, it feels right to make me come unsheathed. Like I'm a weapon, born and bred to threaten. 'Cause when it feels like hell,